Hello and welcome to the Let That Shift Go podcast. I'm Noel.
And I'm Lena.
And this is where we talk about the good, the bad, and all the shift in between.
We'll just talk mad shift.
Let's get into it. And on this week's episode, what the hell are unspoken expectations?
Boundaries versus expectations.
But first, let's get into these skin deep cards.
Yep, let's do it.
You want to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
What do you know is absolutely true about you?
What is absolutely true about me? Why should that be so hard? I feel like I'm put on the spot. What is absolutely true? Gosh, that you have to really be honest with yourself, because some of those things don't come.
Yeah, some things you can waver on, but you're like, oh,
yeah,
absolutely
100% true.
I mean, it's easy for me to come up with one about you, but coming up with one about yourself.
Yeah. Doing it, but for that's something totally different. Something absolutely true about myself. Wow. I'm kind of put on the spot here. I'm feeling like, what is absolutely true about me? I love as fiercely as I hate.
That's okay. All right. Yeah. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. The depths of both are deep.
Okay. Your question is, what's a future experience that could heal a pain of yours from the past?
Throwing myself a big birthday party.
This one's been coming up a bunch.
I know, and I don't want to talk about it, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get into this unspoken expectations.
Yes. So this became something really that stood out to me because I heard this quote, and it was by Neil Strauss. And the quote is this: unspoken expectations are premeditated resentments. And I was like, wow.
You got to pull that one in and sit with it a little bit.
Yeah, that's actually pretty deep, pretty true. And how many times do we not really think about it? And, looking at my own life, even days after that, I was like, how does that show up for me?
Yeah.
And so I thought it was really important for us to talk about today, because I think it happens to all of us.
Yeah.
And one of the things is really, in some ways, it got brought up recently in a situation, was boundaries versus expectations. What are the difference? What is the difference between, what do you think is the difference between a boundary and an expectation?
Well, a boundary, from what I know now, my opinion right now is that a boundary is for ourselves. It's something that we set individually for ourselves, not for another person, just to protect our own well-being.
Yeah. Protect your peace, lead you out of stress and anxiety, or not lead you into it.
Yeah.
The way I look at it too is a boundary is something that I say, well, this is no longer okay. I will not put myself into this situation. Maybe like, I don't like to be touched. I don't like you to touch my hair.
Okay.
Right. And so it's like, that's a boundary for me. Like, that really bugs me.
So how would you set that as a boundary? Because that's for yourself, but not telling other people not to touch your hair.
Yeah, that's something really, benign. But, the boundary would have to then be kind of spoken.
Well, then I almost think that would be like an expectation. Like you would expect, well, just don't touch my hair.
No, because that's an expectation is that somebody wouldn't do that. Unless they had a reason, or for whatever reason. But you may not know, like, well, that's how they express affection. But for me, it'd be like, that's not okay with me. Please don't do that.
Okay.
Or don't call me before 7 a.m. That's a strong boundary.
Yeah.
Like, don't call me. I'm not going to answer. My boundary is I will not answer. Do not call me.
Unless it's an absolute emergency.
Yeah. A boundary is something really that you impose to protect yourself.
Okay.
And I almost think of it like a boundary, like a gate. Like if you think of there's a space between you and I, this is the boundary. Don't cross this boundary.
Okay.
Right. That's the way I would think of a boundary. It's saying that you don't want to be in a certain situation or have something happen to you that is not comfortable.
Well, sometimes people set boundaries without telling the other person, right?
And that's an expectation.
There you go. That's how we get to that expectation.
That's an expectation. That you're just going to assume that somebody would or wouldn't do something And oftentimes it's tied to then a belief,
Yeah.
right? So for example, this is a really silly example, but just think about like, for me, Armando makes me coffee every morning,
Yeah.
right? And so, I sit up, he brings my coffee. That's kind of like the routine. That's what happens, right?
He kind of made a or not a promise, but it
He
was
did.
Like, yeah.
He made a promise when we renewed our vows. That
Okay.
Hebrew. It's in the Bible. So what if Armando, though, at one point said, you know what? I don't want to make her coffee anymore. Like, why doesn't she make me coffee?
Sure.
And so I'm just not going to make her coffee and just see if she'd get up and make the coffee. Right?
Yeah. He might just decide that one day because he doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
Day.
Like, he's like, I'm feeling kind of put upon. I don't even, would she even make the coffee?
Okay.
Right. And so, okay, well, then I'm in bed and I'm like, well, I don't have any coffee.
And he's not saying anything.
He's not
just
saying
decided,
anything. He's just deciding.
I'm going to wait and see if she's going to make it for me.
Right.
When will she get out of bed? How long is she going to take to get out and go, where's the coffee? Oh, don't worry. Just stay seated. I'll make it. That's kind of what he was expecting.
Yeah. Like maybe he's like, yeah, will she even do it? But doesn't say anything.
Yeah. And that's like challenging you, setting you up to fail.
It's a premeditated resentment.
Yes. Okay.
Right?
I get it. Now this quote is feeling so much
It's a premeditated
clearer.
Resentment because let's say I'm sitting in bed and I'm like, he didn't bring me coffee. I wonder if he's mad at me. Or I wonder if I did something that upset him, or you know what, maybe he doesn't care about me anymore. He doesn't care that's the favorite way to get up and have coffee with him. And
chivalry is done.
Yeah. Like there's something's wrong. He just doesn't care. He doesn't care. And so I could create a whole storyline in my head about why he's not doing it. And we could go on, who knows, for days or weeks or months, just thinking like something's up. I did something wrong, or he's no longer interested in my happiness. I could make a whole story about he's no longer interested in my happiness.
Yeah. Well, the longer it goes, the bigger the story becomes.
Yes. It can snowball.
Yeah.
It can snowball big time. And meanwhile, he's just like, there it is. She won't even get up and make the coffee.
And he's sitting in his own.
Now he's building his own stories.
Building his own story.
Yeah, he's building his own stories about how I don't care about what he wants, or I'm too lazy to make whatever. This is coffee.
Meanwhile,
is like
none of that is
coffee
true.
is just a made up thing.
Yeah.
Mondo still makes the coffee, but if it's when you don't express what it is that you're expecting to happen.
Yeah.
What's the alternative? He could have just said, "Hey, you know what? Sometimes I'd like you to make coffee."
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think part of it is, like I call Mom and Annie every day, pretty much during the week while I'm at work. First thing in the morning when I get on the road, I've always got a couple of like 15 to 20 minutes of drive time. So I choose that time to give Mom a call. And then after I talk to Mom for a few minutes, and then I'll call Annie. And sometimes I get too busy. I'm just swamped at work and I'm just inundated with calls right from the get, and I don't call. And, they won't call me. And then the next day will go by and they'll be like, well, you didn't call me. You must be super busy. And I was like, I felt like totally put out, because I was like, well, I was busy. I'm sorry. I didn't
They
get to
had
call
an
you.
expectation.
Yeah. And I was like, I guess I handled it in a better way, because I said, well, there's this silly thing called a call, but you can call me too.
Yeah.
I always call you, but part of me feels like I set up an expectation because it was just something they didn't ask me to do it. I just do it because I like to call them every day.
Yeah.
But maybe I had a hard day, or maybe I didn't feel like calling. And then, like you said, they
went into
received it a different
yeah.
way and was like, is he okay? Is he mad at me? Is it what's something wrong? But meanwhile, I was just busy, like I was busy at work. And it wasn't anything particular to them.
Yeah.
But I was able in that case to say, hey, you can call me. And that was a little sarcastic.
Yeah.
I could have said, hey, sometimes I just get busy, but I appreciate when you guys call me as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes reach out and call me. It makes me feel like you guys want to talk to me also.
Yeah. The alternative is not saying anything, and then there's just built up resentment and conflict.
I do find myself sometimes, because I make coffee for Ellen every day too. And so there have been times, where like maybe on a weekend where there's more time, where I'm usually the first one out of bed. But sometimes I set like, I hope will she make me coffee? Maybe. Let's see. And she doesn't. And then I get all like, she doesn't care about me as much as I care about her. And then I go downstairs and make her coffee and just see her reaction. You know what I mean?
Drink your angry coffee.
Yeah. And I've even had it to the point where I just stopped making coffee because I was angry at her just to prove a point. So I also created, I used it as a weapon.
Yeah.
Which is not healthy, because it took some communication and just some vulnerability to work through that.
Yeah.
And say, hey, I just kind of feel like I'm always doing everything. Yeah. And that's a common thing because that's an expectation.
Yeah.
But a healthier way to say that is like, hey, I'm feeling really swamped in the mornings. And sometimes I don't feel like I get out of the house early enough. It'd be nice. I wonder if you would consider like maybe coming down and help and making coffee together.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
But then you'd have to communicate that.
Yeah. See? And I'm not always great at that.
Because what happens too is like, let's say that you just stopped making it. She never made it. And then everything that she did that seemed like it was not thoughtful was going to reaffirm for you again.
Oh, no, that's exactly what it does. Because then all of a sudden, my big binoculars are on looking for, oh, there it is. Oh, another affirmation. She doesn't.
She doesn't care.
She doesn't care.
Yeah.
She's not even thinking about me.
And in her mind, she's like, I just decided to stop drinking coffee. I don't care about it that much. But it's just unspoken.
Yeah.
It's unspoken. So it leads to resentment.
Yeah.
So those expectations can lead to resentment. And I think there's a big difference between a boundary and an expectation.
Well, is there an expectation from the other side where they're like, well, he didn't make me coffee. What's wrong? See?
Yeah.
And so from both sides, they're going to have an expectation and then they both build resentment.
Yep. And that can snowball. And they can go on forever. I can end friendships, family relationships, all of it if we just aren't able to communicate.
So what is the best way to kind of communicate that and break down? It's like checking in, once in a while, kind of a wellness check.
Yeah, I think just to be kind of self-aware of why you are setting this expectation. Are you looking for something? Are you looking for affirmation of something? Like what's going on in you? Are you angry about something? Or is it bringing up some kind of trigger for you? And being aware of that is probably the hardest part.
Yeah.
Right. And then if you're able to become aware of it and then communicate it, or at least be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
And give yourself an opportunity to say, hey, this is probably something that I need to bring up.
Yeah. And very important to use the I instead of you in your explanations, talking really about how what's happening is making me feel. When this happens, I'm feeling like, I'm overwhelmed in the mornings and I don't feel like I get enough help. And I would really appreciate, if once in a while, if you had some extra time, you could help kind of get this stuff going in the mornings.
Or,
so I can get out on
just
time.
Basically even just asking questions. Just ask a question. Is there a reason why you don't like to make the coffee? Or is there a reason why you don't, like if, mom's not calling or whatever, is there a reason why you don't like to call? And just don't assume that you know the reason.
Well, some people just aren't callers. Some people don't call people.
I don't know any people like that.
Like you. I say that I call, Annie and Mom, but I don't call you every day.
No. And
you don't have an expectation for it though.
And I'm not upset when you don't. You know why? Because I know that you love me. I know that when you call me that I'm going to pick up. If I can, I absolutely will.
Yeah.
And that it's fine.
I think something that maybe I just thought of is that part of the reason that I don't call you is because of you're it's like almost like fear of rejection because you're too busy. Well, she's just busy. She's not going to answer. She's like some of that's like, remember I told you I don't call you when you say the best time to call you is when you're on vacation because you have the most time. But I don't call you then because I feel like that's vacation. Your reset and that's your vacation, And so we talk enough when we're, together. So I don't know. Maybe that was just something I thought of in me because you said, what is it for you why you don't call me? Kind of thing. So I just thought of that for myself. Yeah,
that's fair. That's fair. And, for me, like absolutely like working in the hospital, working in nursing, working flight. I never had my ringer on. Never. Because I couldn't. If I'm in flight or if I'm with a patient, I absolutely cannot talk. Yeah.
I got my phone all the time. I clean pools. It's easy.
Oh, no. And now even when I'm working one-on-one with a client. We're doing light, we're doing sound, we're doing coaching.
Yeah.
That is absolutely not a time that I could just even look at my phone because the person in front of me who is there
You're
for my
holding
full
space.
attention. Yeah, it's like
it's literally
I can't be
the opposite of holding space, having your phone out.
Absolutely. So, that's just know that's the reason.
Yeah. Sounds like a really good excuse. It's solid.
Yeah. Well,
I'll give it to you.
I mean, I don't have an expectation that if you don't call me, you don't love me.
Okay, that makes sense. I think people have different kind of lifestyles that make them available to talk like I talk to people sometimes, because I could talk on the phone while I'm working pretty much.
Or we have different, like we've talked about, love languages. And maybe that is someone's love language, is if you do an act of service for them or you give them your time or your words of affirmation, that's maybe how they receive, love or the acknowledgement that they're important.
Yeah.
And so if you're not aware of that and you're not speaking that language, they could be interpreting that like you don't care.
Well, another way that you could interpret that is like, oh, you know what? They're so kind of angry that I didn't call. That must mean that they missed my call. Like they genuinely wanted to talk to me and they were sad they didn't. So that's why they're calling me out. I could think about it like that. I do not think that first. I promise you.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that would take a level of self-awareness and being kind of the observer of the conversation.
Yeah, I could do it now while we're sitting not in the moment of that conflict, but yeah, that would be, I don't know.
I think, well, the other thing that I think we all do is we want to make ourselves right? We want to be right. That's kind of like in life, we want to be right.
Yeah.
So whatever it is that we are thinking we're right about, whatever that thought process is that the narrative that we're carrying or the lens we're looking through, as soon as you see something in your environment with a stranger, with the person that you have, conflict with, and you see them do or say something, it's like, there it is.
Yeah.
That affirms. He didn't open the door for me.
Yeah, that's that snowball effect. Once the little thing happens and it's uncommunicated or there's no resolution, then I'm going to start looking for every affirmation that I'm right.
Yeah.
And like you said, think and grow rich. What you think, you're right.
Whatever you think, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think some of the, an effective strategy would be?
Well, I think using the I instead of you and talking about your feelings and how the things make you feel in those situations, just really talking about, how it feels when whatever happened.
Yeah. Not in an accusatory way, but just maybe taking ownership of your own feelings over whatever the situation is. Because even, we didn't even talk about professionally, when people are at work. I mean, especially in the workplace, if there is an unspoken expectation about what is your responsibility or what somebody wants from you, you're not able to meet it. You don't even know what it is, what the expectation is.
Yeah.
And so they could be viewing you as a bad employee. You don't care about your job, whatever. You're not a team player. But what if the expectation was never spoken?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I worked in property management, I never really asked for a raise. I just thought that if I worked super hard and they saw how hard I worked, they would just give me a raise.
Oh.
And then I was just, that was that resentment started building because I was like, yo, I'm doing X, Y, Z. And then when I got angry, then I asked, for what I deserved. It was like, I don't know. They were kind of shocked. They were like, well, we didn't know you had all those aspirations to do that. Because I never really, communicated where I wanted to ask. I wanted to get to this level. I had aspirations to, keep doing this and that. I basically just thought, well, they're going to see my worth and then they're going to elevate me because of that. And I think in a lot of workplaces, you're going to see different types of people. And there's some people that don't really deserve it, but they're the squeaky wheel and they're like, well, I'm going to get a raise and I want to be the manager and they're not really qualified. But then you got the quiet one that's probably more qualified that stays reserved and doesn't try to get into the mix too much, but doesn't really advocate for himself. And that's where we get into trouble. Because I think personally and in professional lives, I think we need to be our own advocates. And otherwise, there's going to be, unresolved resentments.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you just leave.
Because that's when you set those expectations, right?
Yeah. You're like, well, obviously they don't value me because they didn't give me a raise or they didn't validate, the work I'm doing.
Yeah.
But that may not be what they're thinking.
Yeah. I could say, well, I'm going to leave if they don't give me a raise. But if I don't say that.
If you didn't ask for the raise.
And then I say, well, I'm giving them 2 weeks. If they don't just come at me with a raise, then I'm gone. I mean, I think I'm worth it. But if I don't express that, it
Yeah.
doesn't give the other person the opportunity.
Well, that's also the reason why when you take a job, let's
Yeah.
say personally versus professionally, right? Professionally, you get a job description,
Yeah.
hopefully,
Yeah.
right? And then you're like, all right, what are the expectations of this job? Let me meet and exceed these expectations. And actually, you even get a review
Yeah.
where they tell you, you know what, here we could do better. Here's, whatever. But in like personally, we don't even do that. We
Yeah.
just expect that the other person must know what our needs are. They must know what we, expect from the relationship and how what they're doing communicates to me that I'm valuable.
Yeah.
And that's not true. It's not real,
No.
And also, if you have a core belief that you're not worthy, that you're not important, all of that, you're going to look for ways in your environment where you're right.
Yeah.
And so there again, there's a premeditated resentment.
Yeah.
By not expressing it. It's like you're looking for it in a way, in some ways.
And it can turn into self-sabotage.
Yeah. Oh, big time. I think that's a big way that we self-sabotage.
Huh.
Absolutely. I don't know. I thought this was a really important one because when I heard that quote, I was like, man, I'll bet we all do this. I know I do it, and I think I have some level of self-awareness, but this one blew me away because I was like, yeah, you know what? This happens all the time. And it's very easily remedied. I mean, easily we could say that maybe it's not always easy to communicate, but it can take a simple conversation to just say, like you said, an I statement, or having a weekly check-in, or a monthly, yearly check-in, like, hey, how are we doing? Like, what's going on? And having a really honest conversation about what are your needs? What are your wants? Where do you feel like you're not getting enough? And be able to kind of take care of the relationship in that way.
And you can also ask the other person, like I heard in somebody was talking about job interviews where you ask the employer, like, where do you see me in 5 years? What how could I help your company the best in the next 5 years? Where would you see me going? And just so that you could see where their expectations long-term is. And I think you could do that, regularly with your own family. Yeah. Just checking in with them. Yeah. Telling them or asking them what their expectations are.
Yeah. And that goes back to even like the circling method that we've talked about in past podcasts is really just, like using that active, deep listening and maybe making that part of the practice, not like really sit down and go, let's check in and let's use deep listening.
Well, because some of us are talkers and we're going to be the one that's going to, well, this is what I'm feeling. But some people are really avoidant in themselves. So that's why I was thinking, well, we can't always have the person who's always want to be the talker saying, well, when this happens, I feel this way. I think the other person, if you're the talker or the anxious one who always has to know, maybe you might ask, is there a level of expectations or some, maybe try to clarify those by asking instead of waiting for them to.
Yeah. And then you have to actually listen.
Yeah. Do the circling technique, repeat what you heard them say and ask a deepening question.
Yep. Yep. And make sure that they feel understood. They feel seen. They feel heard. Giving your full attention and validating their feelings.
Yeah. Invalidating is, can be so devastating. So I think validating the person's hurts and expectations, just, repeating it back to them will just put that energy down to where it's manageable so we can have a loving, open communication.
Yeah. And, even when you're saying that, like validating doesn't necessarily mean that you agree.
Yeah.
It means that
I love that you say that.
That you heard them. There's a difference there too. It's not like,
why is that so misunderstood though? Because I think, people will say, well,
I think it's ego.
I don't have to validate your feelings. I'm not responsible for that.
I think it's ego, honestly. I think it's ego. Sometimes if somebody's saying that I feel hurt when you've said this, then they can be like, well, that's not what I meant. And, you shouldn't feel that way.
Yeah. Oh,
right.
Man.
That's, you're not taking responsibility.
You
a lot of that
misunderstood me.
That's ego.
Yeah.
And that's invalidating. Validating is just saying, I hear you. It doesn't mean you're saying, yeah, you're right. I did feel that way when you did that thing or whatever, or didn't.
Yes.
It's just saying, is that what you said? You're saying that when I don't bring you coffee in the morning, that you thought that I was upset with you, or that you must have done something wrong, or that I didn't care about you. That I hear that that's what you felt, is that I didn't care about you. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes. It doesn't mean that you say, yeah, you're right. You were right to say I didn't care about you. I didn't, whatever. It's just validating and allowing someone to be seen and heard. And then working together to find a solution.
Yeah.
Right?
But our first natural instinct is like, well, it's because, I was really tired and making excuses. And that's all, even though that may not be invalidating directly, making excuses for why you didn't meet.
Yeah. Is invalidating. And I'll tell you, I've been guilty of that myself.
I mean, because you're going to have these, expectations, but if they're not communicated clearly and in a nice, healthy way, loving way.
A loving way. Yeah, that's the thing. This is like basic communication, and I think boundaries is such like a hot word, a hot topic. And we're all trying to have better boundaries and be able to communicate them. But at the same time, having an unspoken expectation is just going to lead to conflict. It will, undoubtedly. Just communicate what you want professionally, personally, in the relationship. Communicate your needs.
Yeah, you have to be your own advocate. And I think that's something that I struggled with my whole life. Is I've always wanted somebody to come save me. And now what I'm really realizing in adulting is that I have to save myself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And communicate clearly what my needs are. Because in the past, I've asked for love in the most unloving ways.
Yeah. We need to create the environment where people feel seen, heard, valued, understood. And then you're going to reduce the likelihood of resentment.
Yeah, I think the listeners at home, what could they do to?
Well, I think here's a challenge. I want the people who are listening at home, I want you to think of one relationship in your life where you might have unspoken expectations. And I want you to take the time to communicate those expectations and do it clearly and see what a difference it makes.
Okay.
Just use it as an experiment, and even the smallest things. Start exercising this muscle, but just really take the time to look. Are there areas in your life where you have unspoken expectations? And how has that led to resentment in the past or currently? And do something different.
Yeah.
Talk about it.
Yeah.
Get to a neutral place, emotionally, physically.
Oh.
First.
Breathe first. Do something to calm yourself.
Do the 10, 20, 30 breath.
I mean, I think it's important, things like we talked about on other episodes was finding ways and times to talk. I think for me and Ellen, it's very helpful to do these types of talks while we're walking.
Yeah.
For some reason, just the walking around the block or going on a hike or something like that.
I think your energy's moving, differently. And it's not like sitting there kind of bubbling.
Yeah, just sitting, looking at each other with the awkwardness of like, okay, I'm going to tell you this vulnerable thing where I'm going to seem, I don't know. Whenever I tell somebody something like that, I feel like it's showing weakness.
Or it feels confrontational.
Yeah, well, and I'm also worried that they're going to invalidate what I'm feeling.
Oh, yeah.
It's rejection.
It's vulnerable.
It's vulnerable.
It's vulnerable.
Yeah. So if you can stay with it, if find a place, a safe space or a good time where you feel good about it, and practice this, challenge yourself to see one relationship in your life. Yeah.
And say, you know what, this is something I'm looking at and working on. Would you mind working on it with me? I kind of feel like maybe this is a thing that I have going on. Let me get your feedback.
Yeah.
It's just going to reduce the chances of misunderstandings and resentment. And those things can last years, lifetimes even. So whether it's professionally or personally.
There's been, family relationships where it can go years, months, without talking because we're too afraid to kind of broach that subject.
Yeah.
And it's gotten too big and awkward.
Yeah.
And even when we're around each other, we're just meh.
Awkward.
Yeah.
And then that just affirms, see, there it is.
When it's been something that's that long, is there a different way to approach it? Like, let's just say it's been years, right? Is there a different way to approach? Because we're talking about coffee and those things are really small. But let's just, say there was something pretty big. Would the same process still apply?
I think that you'd have to maybe, set up a time and say, hey, I want to talk to you about something, and you could say that this is something that's come to my mind. And I feel like perhaps I participated in something like this. Perhaps I didn't communicate. And so I'd like an opportunity to do that now. If the relationship is already bad, it's not going to make it worse. It could possibly make it better. There's a chance for that. So I think it's absolutely worth it. It's just maybe calling someone and sitting down for a conversation. If you care about the relationship, it's worth it.
Yeah, I find it helpful when it's something big and serious for me to write like 2 or 3 drafts of a letter. And I'm not going to use the letter to give to them. I'm just using it so that I have my thoughts clear, because the first one will be rough and it'll just be abrasive, for lack of a better word. And then I'll read through that and go,
delete.
Okay, there's too many U's in there. I need to put some I's in there. I feel this and all. And so working through a letter that I'm going to write to them, you could probably, sometimes there's been cases where it's not the right time to just talk. So giving the letter may be, I've done it where I've just given the letter. But most of the time I use the letter as just practice for me. It's almost like memorizing a speech. So that when I'm in the thick of it,
you've kind of sifted through your thoughts.
And not in a sense that I'm like, oh, well, if they say this, then I'll say that. That part, then you're overthinking it, paralysis by analysis when I get into that. So it's just really just thinking about what I'm going to say and what I feel, because if I'm too worried about what you're going to say, I'm going to, what you're going to do.
Yeah. And I think the one thing too, with talk about communication, is for you to take 100% responsibility for your own involvement.
Yeah.
You take 100% responsibility for your part in it. Sometimes that can just kind of cut down the defense of the other person. And then we're not coming into confrontation. It's like, hey, I feel like I did this. I feel like I may have fill in the blank, and when you can do that, it kind of softens the environment for the conversation to take place, is for you to take full responsibility for your own participation in it, or your lack of understanding or lack of communication. And I think that's a good way to go into it too.
Yeah. And try to turn down the volume on it, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yep. So there's a challenge. Think of one relationship in your life where you might have unspoken expectations.
All right. That's been another episode of Let That Shift Go podcast. I'm Noel.
And I'm Lena. Let us know what your questions are, and we'd love to use them on a future episode. Or check us out on Insta at Let That Shift Go, or visit our website, serenitycovetemecula.com.